How do things work when users roam? We'll look at dialing from the mobile device first. We have at the Halifax site, Chloe's CIPC with device mobility, Chloe's EM profile logged into a phone, and Halifax phones. How do these different devices behave, and how will we explain the behavior to users? There are two kinds of patterns to test: site-specific, patterns that have site-specific routing local to a site, including site-abbreviated dialing and local 7 and 10-digit dialing. E911 and service codes fit this category. And global, patterns that are global, including internal numbers which are global for the enterprise, and long-distance and international patterns that can be successfully routed out any gateway in the enterprise. These two kinds of patterns have different behavior. We created a table to describe how roaming works. Let's start filling in the table. We'll test these one at a time, starting with site-abbreviated dialing. We'll try dialing a Halifax site number, Halifax 696, line 7751 first. We put CIPC and EM in the line text labels for testing. You don't always see device in roaming location when roaming. We could dial Halifax 7751 from both the roaming CIPC and EM profile. It's a success. Hooray! We could not dial Montreal abbreviated numbers like 36002. We get fast busy after dialing 4 digits because at Halifax we have 4-digit dialing. Site-abbreviated dialing works like at the roaming site. So our table looks like this, so far. All phones can dial all internal numbers. We never doubted that. We tested dialing the Saskatchewan 902 site anyway. Now we have internal dialing in the table. We put works in the table. It doesn't matter where you are. It always works the same way. Let's look at 911. We want 911 to be routed out the Halifax gateway, and the calls ring on the Halifax 696 test phone, line 1. Both calls ring on the Halifax 696 test phone, line 1. We dialed out the right gateway, but our caller ID is for Montreal. That's not so good. Now E911 is in the table. Service codes work the same way. Let's look at local 7-digit dialing. We want the Halifax test phone line 2 to ring. We'll keep an eye on the Montreal test phone line 2. Seven-digit calls get routed out the Halifax gateway in both cases. Another success. Let's look at local 10-digit dialing. Can I dial Halifax local or Montreal local 10-digit numbers? Let's start with Halifax. We want the Halifax test phone line 3 to ring. It worked! Hooray! We can dial local 10-digit numbers in Halifax. Now let's try a Montreal local 10-digit number. We'll dial the Montreal test phone, line 3. When we dial local area code 514, we get fast busy after 7 digits have been dialed. Why? At the Halifax site, the only local area codes allowed are 902 and 782. We did this to remove the delay from 7-digit dialing. So when you dial the first 7 digits, 9-514-4600, the CUCM thinks you are making a local 7-digit call. If there was a local 7-digit number, 514-4600, you'd connect to that phone. Is that really what we want? When at the Montreal site, local 7 and 10-digit patterns route to Montreal local numbers. When at the Halifax site, local 7 and 10-digit patterns route to Halifax local numbers. Is this confusing? What do the CVDs have to say? Both the telephony using Cisco UCM and Unified Communications using Cisco BE6000 CVDs offer a similar 10-digit plan. The CVD also uses a line device model, a base calling search space on the device for E911 and internal dialing, and a traditional calling search space on the line with local, long distance, and international patterns to supplement the base calling search space. Here are the patterns available with the international calling search space on the line and base on the device. A roaming user has the same patterns wherever they roam because all devices are configured with the same calling search space. The CVD is using local route groups to route calls out the local gateway. Local route groups direct calls out local gateways, which have site-specific behavior. Roaming users must dial based on the behavior of the PSTN at the roaming site. At Montreal, 902 calls are long distance. Use this pattern. 514 calls are local. Use this pattern. At Halifax, 902 calls are local. Use this pattern. And 514 calls are long distance. Use this pattern. A user roaming from Montreal to Halifax will find that they must dial 1-514-555-1212 instead of 514-555-1212. Users experience dialing behavior based on the roaming site for the CVD configuration. The same as for Enterprise 20. The CVD and Enterprise 20 behavior differ in that Enterprise 20 users attempting to dial an area code not local to the site get a fast busy after dialing 7 digits, or might instead reach a local 7-digit number as just illustrated. 2 points to consider. The CVD does not provide overlapping 7 and 10-digit dialing, so we can't really compare behavior in this respect. And the fast busy after 7 digits happens because we removed the delay for 7-digit dialing. Is this behavior bad enough to consider not removing the delay? We think not, but opinions vary, and you may think differently. Now we have site-specific external dialing in the table. We've put this in a different color to indicate it's not a solution without issues. No solution is without issues. Let's look at global external patterns, long distance and international. These patterns are common to all test phones. We want line 5 on any test phone to ring for the long distance call. We want line 6 on any test phone to ring for the international call. We have no problems routing to global external patterns, long distance and international. The calls route out the Halifax gateway. We have to wait for the T.302 timer to expire for the international call, unless we press pound. Now we have global external dialing in the table. Let's look at speed dials. Chloe has speed dials pointing to Montreal site abbreviated numbers. Site-specific numbers won't work in Halifax as expected from earlier testing. Chloe also has speed dials pointing to Montreal 7 and 10-digit local numbers. When at the Halifax site, 7-digit speed dials will ring the Halifax 7-digit number. If the user programmed and used the speed dial in Montreal, then when they dial at Halifax, they may get fast busy, or worse, a different party. When we try using a 7-digit speed dial with local area code 514, we get fast busy. We know the reason why from earlier testing. We get the same behavior from our call lists. We won't be able to return calls from local 7 or 10-digit Montreal numbers when roaming in Halifax. You don't really get calls with 7-digit caller ID in Montreal. With Mobile Connect, incoming calls from a remote destination show up with the caller ID of the internal line. We had to temporarily remove the line association for Chloe's remote destination, 514-460-0000. Otherwise, incoming calls from that number would show up as coming from her line, 8-573-6001. We get the same behavior from our call lists. When roaming in Halifax, 7-digit calls will route to Halifax numbers, and 10-digit Montreal numbers will get fast busy. When at the Montreal site, speed dials and call list entries for local 7 and 10-digit patterns route to Montreal local numbers. When at the Halifax site, speed dials and call list entries for local 7 and 10-digit patterns route to Halifax local numbers. Montreal speed dials and call list entries may not work. The CVD behavior is the same. Calls from speed dials and call lists route the same way as normal calls. We included them in the table to illustrate that the issues with site-specific dialing apply to speed dials and call lists. Is this confusing? Site-specific dialing gives us grief for speed dials and call lists, for site-abbreviated dialing, and for local 7 and 10-digit dialing. The CVD behavior is the same, except there's no site-abbreviated dialing or overlapping 7 and 10-digit dialing. However, this is not so hard to explain to users. When you roam to a site, everything works like it does for users at that site. Site-abbreviated dialing, local dialing, speed dials, and call lists. Calls from speed dials and call lists at a roaming site may not work in this case. It would be nice if every call worked every time from everywhere. Can we make things better? There's only so much we can do. The NANP is ancient and not built for roaming. We'll look at low-hanging fruit in the next lesson. We can fix some of these issues if we have gateways that use E.164 addressing, or use ISDN where local numbers can be sent with type of number national, or if the gateway allows all numbers to be sent as long-distance numbers with a 1. If you aren't happy with this result, then start thinking about moving to an E.164 dial plan. One reason to deploy an E.164 dial plan is to fix issues with roaming, speed dials, and call lists. This playbook is continued in Dial Plan for Mobility Part 3. Part 3 discusses forwarding from mobile devices.